This week's title, The Orchard by Kristina Garchova-Newberry.
My name is Alina Adams. I was born in Odessa, USSR. I wrote 2 books set in the Soviet Union. My daughter was born in America. I'm going to tell her about the Soviet experience through books.
Is there anything that popped out to you from the cover?
It did. The first thing that actually popped out to me that really intrigued me was the name, Kristina Garchova-Newberry. I feel like there's a whole history, there's a whole life story in that name, because Kristina Garchova speaks of one particular culture, Newberry speaks of another, and it made me think of the fact how my real name, well, my professional name, my author's name, the one I write my books under, is Alina Adams, but my real name is Alina Siverinovsky-Wickham. And I know you're shocked you didn't know that. And I feel that just like my name, Kristina's name tells you a story, because Siverinovsky and Wickham are actually very, very different names. In fact, where did you first hear the name Wickham? Well, rather than as your own name.
Pride and Prejudice.
Pride and Prejudice. So Wickham speaks to a very different type of story, if we're going to talk about story. Siverinovsky speaks of more to Kristina Garchova rather than the Newberry part. But the interesting part is, how did I become Alina Adams? So the very first book that I ever got published was a Regency romance. Now, what do you know about Regency romance?
Bridgerton!
Bridgerton. Are there people named Siverinovsky in Regency romances as a rule?
No.
Which is what my editor at Avon thought. So my very first book, The Fictitious Marquis, was published under the name Alina Adams because somehow Siverinovsky didn't scream Regency England. And as a result, my Soviet fiction books are also Alina Adams, which is why I just want to do a sort of a shout out to Kristina that she didn't have to change her name.
For those who are new, I haven't read the book. So let's start with something basic. Setting, time period, dates, important people in this book.
All right, she hasn't read the book, but I have. So here's what I really enjoyed about the book. This book takes place in the Soviet Union as it stops being the Soviet Union, during perestroika, through perestroika, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union and life afterwards, which I find absolutely fascinating for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, because my family immigrated in the 1970s. So that's sort of, that's Brezhnev, that's the Great Stagnation. That's the Soviet Union that I remember. Growing up, all the people I knew were people who had left in the mid-70s, the late 70s, maybe very much the early 80s. But now I'm meeting so many more people who grew up in that time period where the Soviet Union collapsed, and who have completely different memories of the Soviet Union, not even so much memories as experiences. And what drove this home to me is that my oldest son, your brother, he has studied Russian in Moldova, and then he worked for a summer in Moscow. So he learned a very different, not just cultural Russian, but even a spoken Russian. Like, for instance, he knows all these slang words that my parents, your grandparents, do not know. So it was interesting to me with The Orchard to read the life experiences of people who were very different from the ones that I grew up with.
Now, I'm getting most of my questions from the cover because it's pretty. And
well, actually, let's talk about this. You buy books based on the cover, don't you?
100%. And then my shelf looks all pretty because it's rainbow, guys. My shelf is rainbow. It's so adorable. Anyway.
So what do you like to see on a cover?
Okay. Good question. Now, if I'm buying fantasy, there's a certain fantasy aesthetic that I'm just like, I know I'm going to be drawn to. So there's 2 types of fantasy. There's like the black, completely like everything looks engraved into a fantasy, which I love. And then there's one that's like The Crown, right? And it's like bloody or something, dramatic, like that, like a dagger. Okay? And then for romance, I only buy cartoon covers. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I know your book has a human being on it, but cartoon covers are just so much better and they're cute. And then also, since my shelf is rainbow, it's usually easy for me to, because it's like one color. Usually they pick like pink or blue or a color. And then I can put it in my shelf easily.
Which brings us back to the cover of The Orchard. So what do you see on the cover?
Pomegranates.
They're not pomegranates, they're actually cherries. The fact that The Orchard by Kristina Garchova-Newberry is actually loosely based or inspired by The Cherry Orchard, which is a play by Chekov.
Chekov's gun!
Yes, very good. Look at that. Young people know things. I'm so proud of this young person. Yes, exactly. So the main thing that I think needs to be addressed about this book is, even though it's inspired by The Cherry Orchard, and it's nice if you know The Cherry Orchard because then you sort of get echoes of it as you read it, you do not need to be familiar with The Cherry Orchard.